Hello. It's the last session of the day. Hooray! But also boo. And it's a great one. It's going to be moderated by Rowland Manthorpe from Wired. He's going to introduce the rest of the guests. And imagine I'd said something trite about VR being something that can touch you, but now this is about VR touching you back. Imagine that. And here's the panel.
Hello. Hello. Thanks for coming. The last session of the day. So I'm Rowland Manthorpe. I'm associate editor of Wired. We are here to talk about touch in virtual reality, I guess haptics more specifically. With me are Alastair Barrow from Generic Robotics, is that right?
That is,
yeah. Tom Carter from Ultrahaptics and Thomas Gere from the Virtual Reality Centre. Why don't we start by, if you tell me a little bit about what you do and why you think touch in VR is important.
So, I mean, my experience of touch in VR started in 2004. I did a PhD in haptics specifically, and then went on to apply that to dental training, surgical training, that kind of thing. So very specific applications of the technology. But I've always had a long-standing interest in the psychology of touch, not just in virtual reality, but broadly in our lives generally. And I think it's very easy to demonstrate that the sense of touch is our sort of fundamental psychological connection to the world. We're naturally quite skeptical about vision. So I think on the whole, we're pretty, almost very, very early on, we're quite skeptical about, are we really seeing it or is it an illusion? We sort of understand an optical illusion and we often mistake things visually just all the time in our daily lives. But when you can actually physically make contact, that's when it becomes real. It becomes, your brain actually says, okay, that's a physical thing, and I can sort of store that away as a known good entity in the world. And I think that is still missing within our VR experience, because there is something extraordinary. Even if you put a real table in the place where a virtual table is, you reach out and touch it, it completely changes your experience, and it actually literally is a tangible experience. So I think that's why it matters.
Great, so this is kind of the basic premise I think of a lot of this, is that we need touch to make VR real, quote unquote. I'm sure we're going to carry on talking about this as we go along. But Tom, explain a bit what you're doing about the company.
Sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I would like to know more generally if you agree with this premise of the realness of VR and if that's what we need touch for.
Yeah. So I'm Tom. I'm one of the founders and the CTO of Ultrahaptics. We create feeling in midair without touching anything. So we actually use ultrasound to project feeling sensations, the sense of touch through the air. So when you're in VR, you can reach out and touch and feel objects, trying to carry over and implement exactly what Alastair was saying about that need to contact and feel things in VR. But in addition to that, and almost in the more fun sense, giving you the feeling of things that don't actually exist in the real world as well. So beyond the objects, if any of you have tried our demo in the booth, if you haven't, I almost suggest dashing out of this session and going and trying it instead. We have a demo that lets you train to be a wizard and cast magic spells and feel the spells leave your hands. And in a similar way that the sense of touch lets you believe that the physical objects are real, when you're creating experiences that don't actually exist in the real world, it really heightens that sensation and lets you, I guess in this case, believe you really are a wizard.
And you do a lot of work with car companies.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So I'm sitting here, I'm driving along, and then I can reach out and kind of touch in midair the button which lets me turn on off the radio.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
in VR we do touching objects and what you can see, and turning people into wizards. And outside of VR, we also do a lot of work on controlling devices without touching them, so projecting the feeling of buttons or dials or controls through the air, so you can feel and operate invisible interfaces and control devices without touching them, such as the dashboard of your car. So you can change the stereo or do some of the more frequent activities without taking your eyes off the road.
And then, I mean, obviously you've got skin in this game, but how important do you think touch in VR is? Like, is it?
I think it's a fundamental. I think that the VR experiences that you see today we are in the very early stages of VR, but a lot of the experiences that you see are fairly passive. It's a lot about looking around and immersing yourself in what's happening around you, and that's primarily because there's this challenge of how do you interact and there's lots of people coming up with different ideas of ways that you interact, and I think that sense of touch when you're just picking objects up and moving them around is fundamental, and so I think that's one of the main reasons why the challenge of interacting in VR hasn't been solved yet.
Okay, so Thomas, so you run a kind of a reality centre where people get to try this stuff and come and play with it. What is good in VR, kind of in touching in VR right now? Like what works? What's what could you tell someone right now? This is best in class.
Sure. So I mean, we've done quite a lot of conferences on the different use cases and of VR since December. Actually, the first one we did was on medical surgery with haptics, and that's how I actually got to know robotics and Ultrahaptics. And we also had another company that was doing a different technology. So what was interesting is the three of them were actually using different technologies. So you have the ultrasounds, then you had, I think it's 3 fingers that actually give you more range of movement and will generate robotics, and I think you can explain this to us a bit better later on. And then we had an haptic arm that was used for knee surgery by Fundamental VR, and that was giving a really precise sense of texture as you're training, for injecting, different drugs for a knee surgery. So that was really interesting, and I think beyond this, because we always follow our conference by a hackathon, we did a 24 hours hackathon, and the winners that won actually, they didn't use an haptic technology, but they brought a physical object into the experience. That was actually a physical CPR training dummy called Little Anne.
Because it's actually real.
It was real, and they were using a headset, but they were tracking this physical object in the space, and they were doing this immersive VR application with a lot of stress, everything that you can actually communicate in VR. But they were actually using the physical object and visualizing it virtually, but they had the response. So that was bringing actually a very important physical interface. And if you talk to people that have been in VR for the last 20 years, like Bob Stone and other like grandfathers of VR, they have learned this really important lesson, and they keep advocating us. And he calls it, for example, the human first interface, is to bring the key physical interfaces to actually bring an interface that makes the virtual experience even more real, so you feel even more immersed. And it's a very important factor, so that you actually get proper training application, for example, or another technology.
Yeah, because this is something like, so I guess like the void in Utah would fit into this, right? As in, it's I don't know if does everyone know what the void is? Okay, general nodding, but well, I won't go into like a detailed explanation. But it's that there's the object, so you can bump into it, but its appearance is faked. So is this basically like where touch works right now, when you can take something that's essentially real and put a mask over it to make it seem as if it is something else? Is that kind of? I'm just trying to establish like a baseline for like what works
you have
in
the
touch.
augmented touch, with response.
Yeah.
And for example, even if you're touching an object that has physics. So for example, in your demo, you have those balls that you're trying to grab the ball, and you can actually, for example, it's I think it's a ball game, and you could actually not grab it. You wouldn't be able to do that just with a simple touch. Mm-hmm. And then in yours, you can actually feel even a moving object or a texture, a different texture. So that's beyond the simple physical touch that you have, normally. But what's interesting as well is you have companies in the VR space like HTC that are bringing the trackers, and those can be fitted in physical objects and be represented. And this way you have more, physical interactions within the VR space, and that's quite interesting as well. So that's actually providing a lot of, different, technologies that you could.
The two names for those things are encounter haptics and surrogate objects. So encounter haptics is when you encounter the thing in your physical world. surrogate object is when you actually hold an object in reality that represents something in your virtual environment. And they're both brilliant ways to introduce a sense of touch and sort of ground yourself in some way in virtuality.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask you, like, this is a huge area I know, but psychologically, sorry, the question I want to ask is something like, psychologically, how does touch work? Is it possible to answer that in any kind of brief sense of like what we're trying to do when we introduce touch to people and how they respond?
So the science answer is effectively what is haptics. So haptics is this idea of active touch. Mm-hmm. With active touch, you have feedback. You've got a two-way communication. And so what the brain is doing is it's making a correlation between your action and the senses coming back through your skin. What that effectively means is if you put your hand down on the surface flat and you don't move it, the amount of information coming back there is quite limited. If you start to move it over the surface, your body is actually mapping the velocity of the surface against the vibration signals that are coming back in. And so even though I move my finger at different speeds, the apparent impression of what the texture is stays constant. And that requires a lot of information in constant sort of flow and mapping all the time. And that's the same thing if someone holds out their hand. So there's something called exploratory procedures, which basically if you give someone an object, blindfold them, and let them explore, they will explore that object haptically in a very, very consistent way. So you can break it down to sort of maybe 5 or 6 consistent exploratory procedures. And so if you close your eyes, for example, unfortunately, you know what this is. But basically, I would put that in your hand, and you would do things like unsupported holding, contour following. There's a whole set of these procedures.
It's a pen.
It's a pen.
Incredible.
10 points. Fantastic. But yes, so it's there's physiological activity going on. You've got sensors in the skin, sensors in the muscles, loads of stuff all being fed back. You've got psychological processes that are mapping all that together versus your understanding and expectations and everything else. And there's a whole load of really interesting psychology around haptic illusions and things which we can have fun with in virtuality as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we were talking about this earlier, whether you want to use touch to make the VR world appear real, whether you want it to seem real, as in like a sort of a version of reality that makes you feel as if it's real but it's not real, or whether you want something that's ultra real like magic. I mean, yeah, I wonder what your thoughts on this are in terms of the best and most effective use of it.
I think you'll probably end up, for the majority, possibly it'll be different for the likes of medical training, where actually you really want it to be as hyper realistic as possible, because ultimately you're going to be doing that situation for real in the future, and any kind of memory that you have there is helpful. But for a lot of, particularly in the entertainment side, I think we'll probably end up in touch and in haptics with the same as we have for audio in cinema, as the whole concept of Foley artists, where if you see something on a cinema screen and you hear the real recording of that thing, it sounds terrible.
It's a bit like real dialogue, right? Like real dialogue is the worst.
Yeah, we probably sound terrible here because we've not been Hollywooded. And so they
I think the Hollywood film of this panel is going to really, it's going to be something.
I just want to see the trailer. But the sort of the way they recreate sound effects of things that are really happening using other materials to try and make it sound more real. I think we will see that coming into haptics as well, particularly when, as the director of the piece of entertainment that you're creating, you might want to highlight certain aspects or elements. So if there's, I don't know why we're going to go with the pen again, but if there's sort of a bunch of objects on the table in front of you, you may want to make most of them feel more bland than the pen, which is clearly the most exciting thing, and the whole point of this entertainment experience, to give it that sort of special property that doesn't necessarily, it's not like it's got blinking flashing lights in front of it, but just subtly draws people to it or makes them notice it more.
Yeah, because I think this actually is a question that you come back to a lot, or one comes back to a lot in VR, is to what extent is this a technical challenge or a kind of creative challenge? Is it about just like getting the sheer tech so we can do this, or is it about actually working out the best way to convince someone using the existing materials that we have, Thomas?
Yeah, what's interesting is that you can program the real physics in the objects, or you could completely change them. So I could, for example, squeeze this glass bottle, in VR. You could actually, completely change the physics and that's actually providing quite an amazing experience, you know, and this can actually give, you know, ways, even in training, you know, that could actually, you could learn from mistakes in different ways, you know, so that's quite powerful.
I think it's usually a balance between those two things for all technologies that apply to the sensors, because you've got to have the real technological basis to make it work and know how to trigger those sensors, and then making it feel nice, making it look nice, making it smell nice, making it taste nice is then over to the creative side. So on the technical side, really, you've got to do the work to enable the creativity to happen.
But I think that's exactly right. I don't think you ever see what technology can do until you get it out of the hands of the people who created it.
Yeah.
Put it into the hands of the creatives and let them flourish and see what happens. So it's still too tied up with the technology and the engineers and the scientists who are busy putting together the hardware and the physical things. As soon as we get a little bit of separation there, people can start to play with it and explore and just put a whole different spin on it and do things that you just weren't expecting.
Which brings us very neatly to the question of uses. So what is touch in VR useful for? And you're not allowed to say medical training.
Ooh, how long have you got?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, to make it more concrete, what are we going to use this for in the near term? I mean, because there is this imagined VR world when we're actually living in VR and we're just touching in all the ways that we normally would.
Phenomenal number of options.
Okay. Is one of them porn?
I'll do a few, but because I could spend the rest of the evening on it, I'll make sure and pass it along. So I'll take special needs. So what is VR to someone who's visually impaired? Well, it's almost irrelevant. There is, what are you going to do? Or what is a PowerPoint slide if you're visually impaired? So could you feel the graph? Can you create a...
You're in VR feeling a graph.
Well, why not? So you are in a virtual reality.
Yeah, okay. You're interacting with it in
someone's trying to present
way,
information, okay, and we choose the visual channel all the time because it's easy. There's quite a large subset of people who don't have a visual channel. 3D spatial information is very, very hard to convey audibly through the audible channel. Yeah. And so someone puts up a nice presentation, PowerPoint, beautiful graph. So you can see the graph there, and it shows my point very clearly. Well, no, I can't see it. But if it could be manifest in front of you and you could feel it, then you can understand that spatial awareness. So that's my first one.
Okay.
Good
one.
Is that all right?
Yeah, I really like that one.
So should we move on? So I think creativity, music, art, whatever you like, the sense of touch and that very fast sort of feedback element of touch is incredibly important in playing music, creating art, sculpture, anything like that. There's loads and loads of opportunities around that. That's a really good one. I've got some more, but I'll...
Sure, I was thinking, I think this is going on YouTube, and somewhere out there an accountant's just got very excited about VRXL. We've made somebody's day. I think that I'm going to go down to the very fundamentals of, I think it's going to be used in the very short term just for picking things up and moving them around. So pretty much every VR environment that is created has stuff in it, objects, and people want to reach out and touch them and interact with them and move them around. We already have moved past the Xbox controller largely, but even the sort of hand-attached controllers and clicking to pick things up and move them around is not ideal. So actually reaching out and being able to touch things with your hands and move them around, we're going to want to do that. And one of the ways that I think the sense of touch is often underestimated is it's difficult to see what you're getting from it, what you're learning from it. But the example I go back to is if you go to try and pick something up off of the table in front of you, because your eyes are sort of this far apart on the front of your face, when you get your hand close to the object, perspective kicks in, and actually touching it versus nearly touching it looks exactly the same. You don't have enough aperture in your face, I guess, to be able to determine where you are or how close to the object you are or if you're touching it. And so just for picking this fabled pen up, requires entirely reliant on the sense of touch to be able to do that. I think that's why if you ever look at people in VR using hand tracking but no haptic feedback, they end up sort of putting their hand in through the object and making these weird sort of pincer grasps to pick them up and move them around. So yeah, I'll go with that.
I think that's
sort of fundamental.
Yeah. UI UX is a huge set of opportunities for it.
Yeah.
And the holy grail is getting past intuitive. Because when someone says, oh, this interface is really intuitive, what they mean is I learnt it quite quickly, which means there was something to learn.
Yeah.
If you can get past that and they don't even think about the fact that they were just doing it and it happened, then you've kind of gone past intuitive and you've got something which is just usable and good.
Normal everyday life.
Yeah.
I think when they make the Hollywood film of this, they're going to call it Four Men and a Pen. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Holy Grail, because I guess one thing that this kind of conversation about touch makes me think about is the way that in VR it always seems like we're kind of kicking the ball further and further down the road until we get to the point, this kind of fabled point when it feels real. I mean, Thomas, I wonder, because you get quite a broad overview of these technologies, how far away all this feels. I guess I'm thinking mainly, for commercial and then for consumers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are always people developing suits and the Ultra product, for haptics and also olfactory and everything else. But I think it's about usability. So for the mass market, what they're going to use it for, besides gaming, B2B training, and other sectors. But the ones, for example, are going to have it as a home accessory, and they might use it, just to augment, an experience that they have on the internet. So maybe they're shopping online for either a holiday or product, and they actually want, before they buy it, they want to visualize what they have in their basket, and they just put the headset on, look at the product, but they also want, like in a shop, they want to touch it. They want to manipulate first and then touch it. So they got the visual and also the touch factor to it, so they can make a decision. So it's augmenting the shopping experience or the the browsing experience, and then they can choose to just put it back, next to the printer, and they can continue in their usual 2D environment. And I think it's more about looking at where it's the most useful and the most seamless ways, to actually use it. I don't think it's more towards the very complete, feedback, unless you are an arcade and you want to have the option of, the full VR experience.
In your haptic suits.
Then you're going,
it's everything.
It's 100%, top-notch VIP experience, and you get the full, like the one in the movies, that you've seen. So that's the one. Yeah.
So sorry, I can't quite see the clock. Okay, so I think we've got time. James, how are we doing for time? Excellent. Cool. The perfect amount. Right, let's have some questions. And great. Over there. Let's hang on. Should we? No, go ahead. But should we try and take a couple at the same time, and then we can give them a choice of what they want to answer. Oh well, okay. Well, that was a great plan anyway.
It was a good try. Valiant effort.
Oh, 2 mics. Anyway, sir, go ahead.
So there are a couple of industries that actually drive forward these type of things. So one you mentioned was cars, and one of the main ones that are kind of left out for these kind of things is porn. So how much is the porn industry actually driving touch and haptic technology?
Oh yeah, this is a great question. How have we not talked about porn? Have you
missed it.
So in a totally non-judgmental way, have you ever watched VR porn?
I haven't actually. No, not yet.
Is this a sector you're looking into for your product?
Because I mean, actually, you must be though, really.
Well, you've got to keep the shareholders on board. So they might.
Hang on, I'm sure the shareholders wouldn't they be well into it? That's a big market out there.
Yeah. It's broadly it comes under the banner called teledildonics, which is a thing.
Yeah.
That's sort of existed broadly for quite a while. And yes, there are lots and lots of people looking at it and that kind of thing. But I had a really interesting discussion with someone from the porn industry who came to try our stuff, because we do, a little plug, we do very realistic object manipulation. You reach in, pick stuff up, it has weight, mass, inertia, blah, blah, blah. And so he tried it, and obviously he was like, those ideas. Here's an interesting piece of information for you. As far as we're concerned, the porn industry leads all major technological decisions. When we draw a graph about when the porn industry adopted it versus when the consumers adopted it, we always lead. Doesn't matter whether it's VHS and Betamax or Blu-ray or whatever it is. That's where you look to see where the technology is going and what's going to happen next. And so if you want to know where the haptics is going, you should probably be paying attention to the porn industry.
Okay, yeah. Actually, someone told me, Catherine, was it you? That, yeah, it was. Oh, that in porn, that you just got a 180 field of view, and that behind you, am I getting this right? That behind you can't see anything, and it's because people are just too curious about the people filming it, and it's too distracting. Little factor. Oh, yeah, exactly. It's cheaper as well to make it a 180. Anyway, yeah. So before we go down this rabbit hole, do we have time for one more question? Sorry, sir. I mean, it's a fascinating area. Over there.
How important is resistance as opposed to touch? Because I can see it could be a scenario where you feel like you're touching something and then you start to believe that that object can physically support you or something like that. And there's obviously more than just touch. So you've seen the videos of people falling through virtual objects. If you get a bit of touch back from that, you start to believe it's more real than it actually is.
Okay, great question. Tom, you must have some.
I mean, I think it basically it depends what you're trying to do. So our technology doesn't give you resistance. It doesn't give you. It can't stop you putting your hand through something. So if you want to create a haptic climbing frame or something that somebody might lean on, then we're definitely not the thing to use because they're going to hurt themselves. However, what we've seen for interacting with smaller objects, initially when we started doing our experiments, my concern and almost expectation was that you would really need resistance to actually be able to properly pick things up. Even getting a sensation wouldn't quite be enough. But it turns out that it works really pretty well, just giving somebody sensations for points of contact. So any part of your hand, when it comes in contact with the object, you feel it. And it kind of just feeds this instant stream of information into your brain of have you contacted it, to the extent that we can watch people picking objects up and moving them around, and even though they're getting no resistance, we can tell what shape the object is that they're moving by what form their hands are taking, because they just do actually naturally stop their fingers at that point and adapt to that pretty quickly. As to the myriad of occasions when you're definitely going to need some form of resistance, I think I'm going to hand over to Alastair. He's probably got a lot more experience and ideas in that.
I suppose, I mean,
did you actually get proper resistance?
I know you wanted us to disagree to create interest.
I briefed them beforehand. I said that they should try and disagree because I think that makes for a more interesting panel.
But I think rather than sort of going down the road of our technology does this, your technology does that, they're both brilliant for different things, because fundamentally we create very, very realistic experiences in terms of the shape and the forces and the resistance you get. But it comes with a weight of hardware, whereas the Ultrahaptics approach, you don't have to put a glove on, you don't have to do anything, you just walk up and you just use the interface and it's immediately apparent. I think they're both sort of, they have different applications. What is interesting from a psychological point of view, which is my thing, is that we live in a force world and not a position world. So we're very, very good at perceiving and understanding force, but pretty poor at understanding position. And so actually you can play with the sensation and the senses, and if you do it right, you can move force to position and position to force. And so you don't necessarily have to have resistance to create the impression of a force being applied or something being resisted. You can do a lot there, and you can have my lecture slides if you like, if you would like to know more about that. But what I'm saying basically is you can actually create the apparent effect of resistance without necessarily having force or something physically stopping you. Or likewise, you can create apparent shape with only force, as in your finger may not actually move at all as you go over a surface, but as long as the force profile changes, your brain will tell you there was a shape there. And so, yeah, it gives us a lot of opportunities to play with.
Okay. I'd like to see those lecture slides. That'd be interesting.
The other interesting limitation that I found with sort of no matter how good your haptic system is and how much resistance it can give you, it will break down if you have other physical objects in the environment, which probably won't be subjected to the haptic experience that you have. I have stories I can tell another time of people working and doing design in a VR area with sort of a virtual reality table in there while drinking their can of Coke, and then just as they finished and were sort of running out of mental power, then put the can of Coke down on the virtual table. Goes straight through, lands on the floor, and you get Coke everywhere. So.
James, are we? Any more questions? Okay. Oh well, sorry guys, we're out of time. 4 Men and a Pen. Coming to a cinema near you.
Soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.